Hello, I am the Movie Maestro, and welcome to this very special movie review. As you can probably tell by the quality of my voice, I'm about to make you an offer you can't refuse. This movie is considered by many to be one of the greatest movies ever made. Okay, I'm not going to do this for the entirety of the review, but as you can see, I am back in my dark, shadowy, gritty environment where I start off doing a vocal impression. But in this case, it's not going to be about a horror movie. It's going to be about what is essentially just a dramatic study of a troubled family that happens to be involved in the world of crime. And it just so happens to be one of those movies that many people consider to be one of the greatest films of all time. The film was released in 1972 under the direction of Francis Ford Coppola, with a screenplay by Coppola and Maria Puzo. And of course that movie is The Godfather. It's kind of hard to pin down what to say exactly about a film that many consider the greatest of all time. Though, I will say that personally I thought that it's well worth the praise. It's a fascinating study of people in a difficult situation where it just happens to be part of their everyday lives, and it's surprisingly well paced, and the characters are just so fascinating. And even more fascinating still is the fact that it could easily have been dull, slow, and boring, but really it's not. Especially if this is the type of movie that many of you might be interested in. The story of the film centers around the Corleone family, headed by Don Vito Corleone, played by Marlon Brando. However, the pivotal character of the film is his son Michael Corleone, played by Al Pacino in one of his first ever film roles. And basically the story is about all the trials and tribulations he goes through as he gradually comes to the realization that it's his duty to take over his father's role as Godfather in a family that lives a life of crime, helping people out and being serviceable. And the great thing about this film, in my opinion, is that it's not really a glorification of the mob or anything speaking against it, really. It's very, very ambivalent. In fact, having already seen a couple other films that do a similar thing, this one certainly masters it in almost every respect. The characters are all very interesting. They make the film's deliberate pace seem much less deliberate due to that, and all of them have very legitimate virtues and flaws, and they balance each other out very well in many cases. It's clear that not all of them are doing things that are good, but not all of them are doing things that are entirely terrible. And oddly enough, the film's purpose isn't really to show what the side they're on. As mentioned before, it's largely ambivalent. It's more an observation of a family, and more specifically on the difficult acceptance that inevitably must come to the character of Michael as he develops and learns about the world he must get used to, even though he'd much rather live a more normal life with his wife, played by Diane Keaton. And certainly there are many things about it that work very well in that respect. The atmosphere is also great. This is partially, of course, helped by the superb acting, particularly from Brando, who, in spite of the fact that you can barely tell what he's even saying because of his slurred speech, still gets a lot across. But in addition, the atmosphere is well provided by the very dark, gritty cinematography that makes it difficult to focus on things, as well as Nino Rota's very haunting and very memorable musical score. Certainly, these are many things that deservedly got Academy Awards for this film in addition to the Best Picture. Though, of course, this film is largely infamous for Marlon Brando having turned down his award, refusing to accept it on grounds of making a statement for Native Americans. However, in spite of that, looking at the film on its own, there's really too much to talk about to really narrow it down to a concise review right here, but let me just say, it is fascinating. If I were to talk about what makes it so fascinating, this would go on for an eternity. But let's just say that there are lots of characters with interesting things to grasp. I guess the one flaw that I can point to this film is that there are maybe a couple characters that could use a little bit more of an exploration. But to be fair, they aren't particularly important figures in Michael's life, and this is essentially Michael's story.
So I suppose I can forgive that. And certainly, I really admire the way it observes the mob, partially because the mob itself was very concerned about how this film would be pulled off, and therefore there were several members around to look over things. And another thing that I wished I saw more of, though, were the services to the certain people. The way the film opens is very bizarre and yet so effective. It's simply an interview from someone trying to make justice for the attempted rape of his daughter, and then it's revealed he is speaking to Don Corleone. And the way it's shot is unbelievable. It's a great way to open things off. And the fact that Marlon Brando's character Vito Corleone is willing to do services in spite of the situation for many people in dire situations where nothing else can help is surprisingly touching. It's kind of hard to imagine that it would be, but in fact it largely is. People praise The Godfather like crazy, but really that praise is very, very merited. For something that on the surface wouldn't seem interesting, it's in fact a very, very interesting film, and I really doubt that anybody wouldn't appreciate something out of it. The acting, the writing, the pacing, the music, the cinematography, the atmosphere, it's all very, very well done, and to a very surprising degree. Francis Ford Coppola, of course, became an overnight sensation due to this film, and well-deserved. He's made several other pretty well-thought-out films since. Maybe none that quite reach the level of this, as well as its popular sequel, which I'm sure we'll get to later, but for sure, The Godfather is well worth seeing. On the worth meter, this gets the distinction of an ultimate recommendation. Whether you ultimately will admire this film or not, definitely check it out, though. There are definitely going to be maybe a few things that you're likely to admire, so out of 5 stars, this is a 5 out of 5. Thank you for your time.